Hello and most welcome to 1378. I will continue with Iain McGilchrist, philosopher, psychiatrist, neurologist of fame, and the summary of the book The Master and His Emissary. And I will continue where I left off at 1376. Attending to the world and our expectations. The difficult bit about the stickiness of the left hemisphere is that once we have already decided what the world is going to reveal, we are unlikely to get beyond it. We are prisoners of expectation. Oddly enough, that fits with the previous lecture here, and our expectations deem the superposition to collapse in a certain way. So you can say that the classical mode is a mode of our bodies, an automatic way of collapsing the superposition that leads to a classical worldview. I mentioned in the previous lecture that the superposition is completely undetermined until we encounter it and collapse it. A classical attitude, a morale, as Iain calls it, a position of our body-mind will repeatedly collapse it in the very same way, and thereby creating the classical worldview. It will be known, it will be very close to representations, something already familiar to our system, something homely, repetitive, but also regurgitating. Yes, the same thing done by cows. We use the same material again, again and again. And of course, in a very predictable way, showing the same things, giving the same results, giving that predictability. Our expectations will always be fulfilled. It will fall into place with cause and effect in the same expected, predetermined manner, and we will have a feeling, a sense, a clear experience of a predetermined world. If you remember Roger Federer, it would be like things that happened before will for him decide whether he will hit the ball with his tennis racket. The attitude is very close to things hooking into each other, making a chain of events that doesn't lead to any options. Non-option, decided, pre-established, fixated, random in the sense from the classical viewpoint. There are, of course, too many factors, but potentially the limited number of options, even if there are a gazillion. So in a way they are limited. This is false. It's not limited. There is no predetermination here. It's so good I almost have to read it once more. The difficult bit about the stickiness of the left hemisphere is that once we have already decided what the world is going to reveal, we are unlikely to get beyond it. We are prisoners of expectation. And this is, of course, very close to the Libet experiment, where free will and free thinking seem to be non-existent. Well, the overactive left hemisphere will automatically collapse the superposition, and you will never ever know the difference. In the same way, if you were to dig a big hole in a big mountain, you could dig in a way that you never discover that it's a grand ore, a mother of all ores of gold. A not correct way of depicting it, but very telling, is that the left hemisphere sort of intercepts the openness of reality and shuts it down for options before you have a chance to experience the full freedom of reality. I think that's telling, although it's loosely true only. New experience, as it is first present to the mind, engages the right hemisphere, and as experience becomes familiar, it gets represented by the left hemisphere. What we attend to and how we attend to it changes it and changes us. Seeing is not just the most efficient mechanism for acquiring knowledge, as scientists tend to see it. It is that, of course, but it is also, and before anything else, the main medium by which we enact our relationship with the world. It is an essentially emphatic business. The left hemisphere uncertainty. Since the left hemisphere is concerned with what is certain, with knowledge of the facts, its version of belief is that it is just absence of certainty. If the facts were certain, according to its view, it should be able to "I know that" instead. This view of belief comes from the left hemisphere's disposition towards the world. Interest in what is useful, therefore fixed and certain. The train timetable is no good if one can't rely on it. So belief is just a feeble form of knowing, as far as it is concerned. But belief in terms of the right hemisphere is different, because its disposition towards the world is different. The right hemisphere does not know anything in the sense of certain knowledge. For it, belief is a matter of care. It describes a relationship. Where there is a calling and an answering. The root concept, responsibility. In the left hemisphere situation, it prioritizes the system. Regardless of experience, it stays within the system of science. Truth for it is coherence, because for it there is no world beyond, no other, nothing outside the mind to correspond with. That's what it says here. So it corresponds with itself. In other words, it coheres. The right hemisphere prioritizes what it learns from experience. The real state of existing things out there. For the right hemisphere, truth is not mere coherence, but correspondence with something other than itself. Truth for it is understood in the sense of being true to something. Faithfulness to whatever it is that exists apart from ourselves. All knowledge is knowledge of difference. If Bateson is right, that all knowledge is knowledge of difference, this method is the only way to know anything. Categorizing something leads only to loss of the essential difference. And I would like to compare here with fractality, understanding that difference is what we're after, and two fractalities read each other off, and it's not a representation. What happens in the zone between the exogenous fractality and the endogenous fractality. We have depicted that many times. In between, in the Lichtung, here reality becomes or becoming. Ideal types, Jung's archetypes. This is where we come back to the will. some of the most powerful drivers of human behavior are such ideal types. Not character types, which are effectively stereotypes. But something akin to archetypes. That have living power in the imagination and can call us towards them. Narratives of a certain way of being that we tell ourselves to make sense of our experience, and which in turn help to shape our responses to experience. These are types, but they have certain qualities that suggest a right hemisphere origin. They are not reductions downwards, but aspirations upwards. They are derived from experience, but are not encompassed by it. They have effective meaning for us and are not simply abstractions. Their structure, as none points out, has much in common with narrative. They cannot be derived from or converted into rules or procedures. They have much in common with Jung's archetypes. He saw these as bridging the unconscious realm of instinct and the conscious realm of cognition. In which each helps to shape the other, experienced through images or metaphors that carry over to us affective or spiritual meaning from an unconscious realm. In their presence, we experience a pull, a force of attraction, a longing which leads us towards something beyond our own conscious experience, and which Jung saw as derived from the broader experience of humankind. Seeing clearly is a representation. The biggest problem of explicitness, however, is that it returns us to what we already know. It reduces a unique experience, person or thing, to a bunch of abstracted, therefore central concepts that we could have found already anywhere else, and indeed had already. Knowing in the sense of seeing clearly is always seeing as something already known. And therefore not present, but represented. Free want rather than free will. The most highly evolved part of the brain, the frontal cortex, achieves what it does largely by negating or not negating other brain activity. The cortex's job is to prevent the inappropriate response rather than to produce the appropriate ones, writes Joseph Ledoux. That is, it passes down from among things that exist. It selects, it does not originate. And one answer to the problem raised for free will by Libet's experiments is that there is time between the unconscious initiation of an action and its execution for the conscious mind to intervene and veto the action. In this sense, it may exert its influence more as a free want than a free will. Viewed from the phenomenological point of view, however, we feel ourselves to be free, though being pulled, drawn, attracted forward towards, and by things that have a sort of magnetic power, such as archetypes. Rather than pushed or prodded forward by what's happened. My comment here, what's happened is what we perceive to be our will, but that's a predetermined pre-collapsing of the superposition, dominance of the left hemisphere, giving us no option, seeing everything as completely determined on what happened before. That is the left hemisphere's thinking, and that would be the thinking of a person who had a brain hemorrhage in his right hemisphere, or suffering a tumor in the right hemisphere, or had the hemisphere for a moment deactivated by a magnetic wave, which can be done to closely study the behavior of the left hemisphere. And I think this is rather telling. We know which hemisphere is causing the classical model today, and its dominance will terminally cause that picture, because it will automatically collapse the world into a classical worldview, inevitably, without exception. We have then become free to choose our own values, our ideals. Not necessarily wisely, of course. This process could be commandeered by the left hemisphere. Again, if it could only persuade us to imitate and acquire left hemisphere ways of being in the world. That is what I believe has happened in the recent Western history. In our contemporary world, skills have been downgraded and subverted into algorithms. We are busy imitating machines, and I think this is a good point to end when it's going smoothly. But you see here the connection, and I think it's, if this were to be a court and I were to be the defender of quantum perception and quantum Darwinism, it is clear we have a culprit for the classical world. We can isolate it with a Tom, or with what happened to that person having a problem with his right hemisphere, and they will show the classical worldview. And they don't have a choice. So we can see the corporal origin of the classical mode. This to be added to the scientific proof of quantum reality. It's here, it's come to stay, but our brains has been adapted or created the classical worldview. And although it is created it in this way, it's too predictable, too same to have the quality of reality, which is difference. It's a degree of reality, and the classical world is way too similar, non-informative, not being able to make readout, because its coastline is way too straight. I end here and I say thank you very much for your patience. Have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.